girl. How's it going?
So good. How are you?
Good. My coffee is kicking in.
Mine
and I
too.
have my notepad and my paper.
She's going to get some coaching today. Like, right?
Yep, that's what's happening. I also add, for those of you guys who've been watching for a while, I might look a little different because I've added one of my lights above me and like bouncing it off the wall in front of me because I was tired of looking tired. And also the light just shifts no matter what time of day it is. It's so different in this apartment.
No,
So
actually,
anyway.
well, you probably heard from this, but my husband was like, if you're going to keep doing these lives, you have to get a better phone. Like, I actually have great lighting, but my camera phone isn't good. So, anyways, I have a new phone coming. It wasn't here for today, but my video quality will be better going forward.
That's awesome. Okay, so as always, if you are watching this live, this is a conversation between all of us. It's not just me and Lorrie. It's absolutely, we want to hear from you. We want you to comment. We want you to ask questions. So if you have questions that you want to ask us in the moment, you can do that one of two ways. You can either type your question in the comment feed and we will try and get to it that way, or the better way, I think, is to ask me a question with the question card, which is right next to your comments. You just hit that, type in a question that pops up so then I can actually bring it on and show it to everybody. And yeah. All right. So today's topic, fear.
It'll be a fun one.
It's going to be so fun.
I have to tell you, I had a coaching call with, or I guess it was our last one. I feel like so often, like whenever I do coaching calls, we talk about stuff. I'm like, well, that wasn't very fun, but that's what you needed. Like I'll end coaching calls with like, go do it and let it feel like ass anyway. Like, and like, sometimes that's like the best advice I have for people. So today might be one of those days. And fair warning, I might get a little preachy. I think I'm at this point of like, seeing so many people let the fear hold them back, and I'm guessing you see this a lot too, that I'm almost like at that place of like righteous indignation for like these people that I love so much. Even though like you guys on here, I don't know all of you, but I'm like, I feel like as soon as somebody, like if you follow me on Facebook or if you even follow me on Instagram, I'm like, I love you. I kind of think of all of you as my clients. And then I see people who are like letting the fear hold them back and they're not reaching their goals. And I'm always very gentle and loving about all of it. But I think I'm kind of like, guys, I love you. Stop it. Like,
yeah.
Stop it.
It's like, you're better than this.
Yeah, and it's just not that big a deal. Anyway, so I'm really excited that we're having this conversation today for a lot of reasons. And we'll try to keep it in
to an hour.
Quasi gentle.
Awesome. Okay, so let's start with. Well, actually, I think what might. Do you plan on doing any sort of modeling today?
I don't think so. I think it's very hard with it being backwards. And as I thought about it, I think we can do it without it today. So we'll try.
Okay, cool. So in your mind, what is the definition of fear? Because there's like the chemical fear, right? The fight or flight that comes up for people, but our brains don't often know the difference and all that stuff. So walk us through sort of fear, what it means.
Right. Well, I mean, I think that's the big thing is it doesn't mean anything, not really, like in terms of, are we talking big picture meaning? But this conversation gets into a similar conversation that I have with people a lot, which really is just what are emotions in general? And it's one of my favorite things to do in a coaching session. And those of you guys who are on here live, because people will tell me they'll talk about having fear or anxiety or something else. And I just ask them to define it. It's like, what is scarcity? What is lack? Like, what is, feeling broken? What is feeling not enough? Like any sort of emotional state, happy, sadness, joy, fear, anger. And I'm like, what is it? And it's so interesting whenever I ask people, if we could pause right now and I could talk to every one of you, but I'm like, what is an emotion? And then listen to people try to come up with stuff. They end up either describing the emotion with other emotions or trying to tell me where it comes from or what it produces. But very few people actually even know how to define an emotion by itself. Mm-hmm. And this is where I get preachy because I'm like, we don't even know what these things are. And yet most of us are not living the lives that we want to live because we're afraid of these things that we can't even define. And maybe that's part of the problem. Maybe part of the problem is they feel, I think, kind of scary and unknown. And when you don't really know what something is, just that sense of it being unknown can be scary. So I approach everything. I joke. I'm like, I am the most like logical, like scientific, abstract thinking person, and I talk about emotions all day long, but it's, which I think is just hilarious. But part of how I have gotten comfortable with emotions like fear and been able to work with them and still reach goals is by having a very factual and scientific understanding of emotions. So even like beyond fear itself, like just emotions in general, guys, they're just vibrations in your body. Like that's the best explanation. Like you have a thought that creates an emotional vibration, and it does release chemicals in the brain that then you feel in your body. So fear, might feel like a racing heart. You might be kind of sweating. You might breathe a little bit faster, but that's all just like a chemical cocktail that your brain produced because you had a fearful thought. And it's not harmful. So emotions, they're just vibrations. And here's the other thing about emotions, whether it's fear or any other one. Scientifically, they last 90 seconds. 90 seconds, okay? You have a thought, there's a release of like this chemical cocktail, we have the sensation in our body for 90 seconds. Mm-hmm. And unless you renew it, unless you grab onto it, unless you dive into it, if you actually just, if you resist it, if you push it down, all those things. But if it comes up and you can actually just allow it, it genuinely lasts 90 seconds and then it's gone. And if you continue to feel it, it's because you're renewing the emotion with your thinking. And so guys, most of us, we're not making that phone call. We're not putting the video out. We're not launching the thing. We're not doing all of this. We're not getting up on a stage and sharing our truth because we might feel an emotion that lasts 90 seconds and isn't harmful.
So an example I'm thinking of right now because we're not used to feeling to understanding that 90-second rule. Think about the last time you were driving on the highway and you saw a cop behind you and you thought he was going to pull you over, and it's that surge of adrenaline and fear that happens. Yeah. And then he passes you, but the adrenaline is still there in your body, but it doesn't last very long, and it does dissipate in about 60 to 90 seconds.
Yeah,
that would be like a really clear example of what that might feel like to you. Yes. And I feel like that the fight or flight cocktail is probably, it's more powerful. It's meant for us to run away from lions versus, cops and stuff. But I feel like the other cocktails that emotions produce might be subtler. Mm-hmm. And if you're not paying attention to them, and then instead you're just making them move forward, that you might not realize that that's what's happened, that you can actually let it go.
Yes. Well, and I think that's the thing too, where you're driving and there's some of that initial stuff and it just happens so fast. And that's the thing, like fear, some of these things, they're normal human emotions. And it's a very helpful part of your brain that can look at a possible scenario where we might be in danger and give us some warning, right? And so the problem is it can't tell the difference between physical harm and emotional suffering. And but it's really, really this helpful thing where it's like, here, let's flood you with all the things you might need to run away, right? But what happens for most of us is that happens, and that's one of those things that's probably going to happen like in an instant. But like you're saying, because we're not aware of it, because we don't understand it, we think it means something. And then we oh my gosh, yeah, what if that happened? What if that happened? And then we start we're like spiraling and encouraging it. And then we're in anxiety, and we don't manage our minds very well. We're used to just letting them go. And sometimes we think like, no, I experienced this emotion. It lasted for hours, it lasted for days, it lasted for weeks. It's like, no, like your thinking lasted for hours and days and weeks because you didn't get that under control. Mm-hmm. But the actual emotion are always only 90 seconds. Mm-hmm. So that's such a good example, my friend. I love that you're more visual. I'm so abstract. I love it when people are like, oh, look at these like metaphors and great things.
Well, I tend to learn from example, so I can watch somebody do something or hear about somebody doing something. This, I feel like, is this wrong of me to say that some of this should be prefaced by saying we're talking about things that are not extreme? And by extreme, I mean like if you're in an abusive relationship, or if you're, something that's a little like more normal that more everyday people would experience. Is that okay for me to preface this by saying that? Because
Well, yeah.
because
Yeah.
I feel like if we're trying to make this you know, the 90-second thing, like, but if you're in a situation that's consistently, you know, causing that reaction in you, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about like people, you know, who we're sitting at our desk during the week and we're afraid to do the work, or we're an actor who's, you know, who knows they should be doing stuff, but they're afraid because they don't know how, and all that stuff.
Yeah. So the way that this is such a good example, and that's the thing with fear. When we look at it, we understand it, and we understand it as a helpful protective mechanism of the brain. We can approach it differently, and we don't need to throw it out or be afraid of it. We can just understand it and understand where it's coming from. And I like to use, you know, speaking of metaphors, the idea of cleaning out your house, right? There's this huge, like, let's KonMari everything sort of deal. And I sometimes think of our emotions or different aspects of our life as different rooms in a house, or different things if we're thinking about KonMariing it. So there's some stuff like that room in your brain that's full of like the negative thoughts that you have about yourself, that's full of shame, that's full of that. Guys, we don't need to sort through that. Just load those boxes up and get rid of them. Like, that's that stuff. That's that stuff that's like been in the garage and you don't even know what's in it. You haven't opened it for 5 years. It doesn't matter what's in it because it's not helpful. We just need to get rid of it. We have stuff like that. Some of you guys have rooms full of like positive thoughts about yourself that you're like hiding, and those need to come out and like be put on the shelves to display. Like, they're really good things. But fear is interesting. Fear, I feel like, is like, I don't know, like a drawer full of pins where you actually need to pull them out and see like which ones work and which ones don't. And like, you have to sort through it because there are a lot of times when fear is actually very helpful. Like having a fear of heights, really, really good. Like walking next to traffic and a car getting kind of close to you and you feeling afraid is very good. Being in a relationship where you actually aren't safe, that fear is so helpful. We don't want to get rid of that. Like, it's great. Like, keep it, use it to help decide what you're going to do and take action. And if you are actually in physical danger, fear is how your brain lets you know about that. It's great. It's fantastic. Right. But this is what we're talking about, is going through and sorting it out. It's like when we're actually afraid of simply feeling an emotion, or sometimes we're just afraid of feeling fear, or we're afraid of feeling whatever's happening at the end. That's the time whenever it's not helpful. And that's where that primitive part of your brain is in charge, and it doesn't know what like the more logical, upper thinking, evolved part of your brain knows. That's like, no, like getting up on a stage in public speaking is actually not physically harmful, but your brain thinks that it is. And so this is where we have to kind of sort through and realize, like, okay, if I get up on a stage and I bomb, the worst thing that happens really is the emotion of like embarrassment or feeling like a failure. And none of that is actually harmful. So that's where we have to work backwards between when it's useful and when it's actually just keeping us from what we want.
So basically using fear as a tool.
Yeah.
Using fear as a tool. Yeah. That whole thing about like not doing something because I'm afraid to feel the emotion that I'm thinking it's going to produce. You guys, that's my whole life. That's my whole life. And I feel like that's everybody, but you
Always.
just might not recognize that. So,
well, and usually too, sorry. I always get off track here. I just have to like interject stuff. Well, the other thing is, usually what we're most afraid of feeling, we're already feeling. We're just doing it in advance. Where it's like, if I get up on this stage and I talk, I might be embarrassed. Then we don't get up on that stage, and then we feel embarrassed because we're not going and doing what we know we should be doing. Right? So like most of you guys, this thing that you're afraid of feeling, I want you guys to actually like work it backwards, because most of the time we just make choices that guarantee we feel it now because we're afraid to feel it then. It's fascinating.
Why is that? Why is it that we're afraid to feel it in the future? Is it because we're all just so wildly optimistic that we're like, our futures are going to work out great? Or is what is that? What is that about?
I think it's like what we talked about. We create our own experience of reality. And if we're having that kind of thinking, we end up making it true. But I think a lot of times we're more uncomfortable, or we prefer the pain that we are familiar with to the pain that feels unknown. And most of us, we get very used to feeling disappointed in ourselves and our day-to-day life. And we kind of would just rather stay there because even though it sucks, it's more familiar. And that But guys, this is not a character flaw. This is brain science. Okay, there's nothing wrong with you. Your brain is wired to do what's familiar. It's wired for efficiency. And if it's like, this is how we've done it in the past, it's always going to prefer to go down those normal pathways. It doesn't mean anything at all. It's just genuinely that your brain prefers to stick with things that are comfortable and familiar. And going and doing something that you've never done, like everything about like the protective, lower thinking part of your brain, the primitive part of your brain, the part that's based on emotion, the part that thinks that we really just need to stay safe and everything is dangerous, is everything about that is wired for the opposite of what we often need to do, because our brain's saying like, only do things that feel good, avoid things that are really painful, try to be really efficient. And then we decide we want to go do this big thing, and it requires being comfortable on purpose, taking massive action, delaying gratification. Genuinely, guys, the things that we have to do to reach our goals go completely against everything your primitive brain is thinking. And that, but I think a lot of us think that means there's something wrong with this. It doesn't. Again, I say this all the time. It means you have a normal functioning human brain. Yeah. Congratulations.
Yeah. It's amazing. So the thing about like not wanting to feel the feeling, me, but also me, is I think that my thoughts and emotions that I'm having, like you said, mean something about me, mean I'm defective, mean I'm not good enough, mean I can't do it. And I'm learning how to not believe that, because I feel like those thoughts are probably going to be there for a while until I learn not to have those thoughts anymore. But even if I did have those thoughts, like now I can choose not to believe it. I can be like, thanks, brain. Thank you.
It's so good. No, and I think you hit on this. It's so I think there's kind of two levels to this of like, what do we make the fear mean, right? And again, so because if we're going to move through it, we have to understand it and understand what's really scary about it. I love, this was like, actually, this was a long time ago. I did a discovery session with an actor, and they came in and they were just talking about like, I'm afraid to do this, and I'm afraid to do this. When I do this, I feel afraid. And they kept kind of like talking, and I was listening, and I had yet to hear anything that actually sounded like a problem to me, because again, I'm like, fear's normal. And I just stopped them, and I was like, it sounds to me like you think the fear is a problem. They're like, yeah. I was like, it's not. They're like, oh. And you could see they had this moment of like, they hadn't realized it, but underneath all of those like surface thoughts was this belief that the fear was a problem and that it meant something. Mm-hmm. And when you take that away, the meaning of the fear, and just make it it's a normal human emotion that my brain is doing because it's protecting me, and it doesn't actually mean anything about my career, doesn't mean anything about my abilities, doesn't mean anything except that I have a normal functioning human brain, it completely transforms it. So I think the meaning that we give to the fear itself is really, really huge. And I think most people think it actually means something has gone wrong. Or for some of you guys, that like, we think that there's going to be some point when we don't feel it anymore. And it's like, well, yeah, I was afraid initially, but I've been going out and I've been doing my acting classes now for a year. I've been auditioning for 3 years, and I still get afraid. And we think it means something, and it doesn't.
Let's loop back, because I think for a lot of people, this idea that it's not like whatever emotion you're feeling is, what did you say? It's not a problem? Yeah. That might be a bit challenging. And I know that it's challenging because of our coaching yesterday. So we were coaching yesterday about, I would like to become a morning exerciser, because the longer in my day it goes, I become like, I just get too busy. And then by the end of the day, I'm like, I'm so tired. So I'm up with my dog at 6 a.m. anyway. So I'm like, I should be taking this time, but it's really difficult. And I was telling her, I was going through all these thoughts with you, and you picked out one that is over here. So the thought we picked out was, it's hard. Mm-hmm. And you were like, and why is hard bad? Why does it being hard or feeling hard, why is that bad? And I was like, what do you mean, why is that bad? Obviously it's bad. And you were like, but does it have to mean it that being hard, could being hard and feeling hard, could that be a good thing?
Mm-hmm.
I was like, could it be that that's how it's supposed to be?
Mm-hmm.
And then you're like, and that's the point. And I was like, this was my face, you guys. I was like, I feel really uncomfortable with this because I fully believe all the thoughts that are in my head most of the time, and it's very annoying. And so let's take this concept of fear and talk about why it's not bad. Why it can be used, how it can be used as a tool, why, and I feel like maybe we should give an example, right? So it's not just like this concept of fear, but let's get a little bit more specific with it. So our audience here is actors. So let's say that there's an actor who is getting a referral to their friend's agent, and they have to like send an email with their stuff and say, hi, this is who I am, and I would love to connect. But they're having fear around sending that email because of a variety of reasons. And those reasons could include they don't like their materials, or they feel weird and salesy, or they feel, like they don't know what to say. Like there's a whole bunch of excuses. But really what it's all stemming from is fear. So let's figure out how the fear there can be good. Because I know people watching this and listening to this later, they're going to be like, fear is not good. I don't want to feel fear anymore. Right? And I just feel like if the concept of any feeling could be construed as something good and not necessarily bad, or sometimes the verse, it's just, that's a weird concept for a lot of people, myself included. So
yeah. But I mean, but what if it wasn't? But even this language of like, how can it be good or bad?
You guys, see, she calls me out. It's so good.
Yeah,
so good.
This I think for all of you guys, I think that this really is the heart of the problem. I talk to so many people and they make their emotions a morality issue. Even like labeling them as good and bad, or guys, okay, here's my latest soapbox.
Look at my face, you guys. Look at my face. What? What? Let's okay, repeat that again. They make their emotions, whatever that emotion is, including fear, they make it a morality issue.
Yeah.
As if like having fear is immoral.
Yeah, or like that they're doing something bad or wrong by experiencing it. But like, what if that wasn't the case? Like, what if, because again, even the idea of like right near, like, how can we see it as good? It's like, what if we just saw it as human? Okay, but like, let's go, because, okay, we label emotions even here as like positive or negative, right? Like, this is how most of y'all do it. And this is what we talk about. Okay, I don't think that's helpful. Because somebody tell me, is empathy a positive emotion or a negative one?
I would say it's positive.
But it feels like shit. Because in order to feel empathy, you have to connect with the part of you that understands the pain that another person is going through, unless you're just in sympathy. Sympathy is easier. Sympathy is like, oh, I'm so sorry, it's so bad for you. Empathy means you get down in the pit with people, you look at somebody who's hurting, you connect with the part of you that understands what it's like to hurt. That is not comfortable. Commitment, tenacity. We might, again, label those as positive, but they also don't necessarily feel good. Like, they're good things, but they're actually very uncomfortable in the moment. And so I think anytime we start taking emotions and trying to put them into these very clear black, white categories, I just don't think it's useful information. I don't think it's a useful way to look at our emotions. I don't think they're helpful labels. I understand I am a human. I get that we have to have language. It's totally fine. But for ourselves, as soon as fear becomes bad or wrong and something else is good, it actually sets up this dynamic that really doesn't serve us. But if it's just fear is human, it is normal, and we don't judge it. Okay, not even like it's good, bad, like not good, bad, not right, wrong, not any of that. It just exists as a normal human emotion among other human emotions. What that frees us up to do is understand it. And most of us don't understand our emotions because we're so busy judging them or being afraid of them or running away from them or trying to get rid of them. But that is what we do when we label an emotion as bad.
Okay. Okay. That's really hard. Do you guys think this is hard? Please tell me I'm not the only one who is like, that is a really hard thing to do in practice.
Oh, totally. Guys, the last 2 days, by the way, just I am human. Okay, so I am at a place in my business where I am growing at a really like rapid level. This is like, it's so funny to say that this is even like a problem, but like I actually reached a number of my goals ahead of time. And now I feel, kind of a little bit like I'm scrambling because I'm like, okay, I thought I had months to get this stuff in order. Like, what do I want to do? Anyways, there's all of that. The last 2 days, imposter syndrome at a level I don't know that I've ever experienced. Okay. I'm doing better in my business than I ever had and still experiencing it. And it sucked. Like, it's been 2 days of like just genuinely sucking. And like, it feels awful. Like, it feels awful. But that's the thing. But even for myself, I caught myself trying to fix it because I don't like it. It's so uncomfortable. But that was the thing. Like, I finally got to a place of peace with it whenever, because I don't think I realized I was doing it. I was so busy coaching. It was just kind of like in the margins and like a little bit. But I sat down and I just wrote in my journal, like, what if this isn't a problem? What if nothing's gone wrong? And I was like, oh yeah, most people, whenever they grow and do new things, feel a bit of imposter syndrome. Great. And I made peace with that in that moment. And what happened was it took it from like being at like a level 10 down to like a 2. And so it was still there a little bit, but it just wasn't that big of a deal. So it is, though, I have to say, like, after just going through a chunk of this, it is incredibly uncomfortable. It just isn't harmful. It just isn't dangerous. It just genuinely isn't a problem. But we suffer when we have this idea that we ought to be happier more often than we are, which is why we kind of want to get rid of it. Sorry, I'm getting way off on a tangent here. But just to say, like, I do get that this is uncomfortable for sure. Like, I experience this on a regular basis. I also would love if we could just make them go away and just feel the happy ones all the time. But it's not how it works. And we would genuinely have to shut down half of our humanity if we were going to just feel happy all the time. We would have to turn a blind eye to the suffering in the world. We would have to shut off that part of our brain that can look for danger and seek that out and protect us. Like, there's so much stuff that we would have to cut off. And it would actually be, I mean, if you think about fear, if we get rid of fear, we're actually in more danger than with it because we can't predict things that could go wrong. So I'm like, in the moment, fear is uncomfortable. In theory, whenever I'm not in the midst of fear, I do this work on fear so that I have like a script ready for myself when I'm in it of understanding it's not harmful, it's normal, and actually even being able to appreciate the upsides to that, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it totally does. So the idea of being willing to live in the uncomfortableness for a minute, right?
Yes.
So how do you start to become that person? Because the first couple times it's going to be so difficult that it might cause somebody to quit and never want to do it again. You know what I mean? Like, for some people, it's going to just, like, I know for me, if I'm feeling an emotion that I really don't like, I feel it physically, which is what you were already talking about, like, emotions being a vibration, right? So I feel it a lot. So certain emotions feel different. Like, I get like real uncomfortable and I have to move around and stuff like that. So how do you become somebody who can start to consistently be okay with being in the uncomfortable space for a minute?
Yeah. Practice.
Okay, cool.
I mean, for real.
Easy. I'm done. All right.
I mean, kind of like, it really is. I don't want to overcomplicate this because I think it does come from making a very conscious choice of, are you willing to feel it? Okay, because a lot of us just aren't. And that's why we react and we go get busy and we do different things. We push it down because we haven't actually made a conscious decision to feel it. And we haven't decided that we're willing to be uncomfortable. And so I mean, that is some of it. Some of it's like making that intentional decision. I do think it's why I like to talk to people about emotions as a whole, because I think having some language and some understanding makes that willingness easier. But I do think it's a conscious choice. But it really just does come down to practice. So sometimes it looks as much as like setting a timer and be like, I'm going to feel this for 5 minutes and then shut it off. Because most of you guys are actually, I don't know, I think we have this idea of like either I'm not feeling or I'm like, you know, in a ball on the kitchen floor. And it's not really that dramatic. Like, if most of you guys are shutting down your emotions most of the day anyway, so you're perfectly capable of it. Like, you can set a timer and feel it for 5 minutes and then shut it down again. Like, you already know how to do that. Like, you're already doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can build up a resiliency, but the space of feeling it for a short amount of time, for a minute, and then 2 minutes, and recognizing you didn't die is really helpful information. Because I think that is like actually the part of your brain, because remember how we talked about early on that it can't tell the difference between physical harm and like emotional pain. And so there is you guys need to understand when we're talking about feeling fear and doing it anyways, there is actually a part of your brain that thinks that you are in physical danger. It thinks that if you sit down and feel this, it's actually going to harm you. And sometimes it actually looks like just showing up, being afraid, doing it anyway, so that your brain understands that you didn't die. But sometimes we just have to do it. But guys, this is courage. Like, courage isn't like I didn't feel fear. Courage, the whole reason we have the word courage is it's feeling the fear and doing it anyway, and learning that we can do that. I think the distinction is that a lot of people, or it's like, I feel fear and I'm going to do it anyway by disregarding my emotions, by shoving it down, by burying it and getting rid of it, because again, we think there's something wrong. That's very different than feeling the fear, acknowledging it, accepting it as normal, making peace with it as human, and then going and doing the thing anyway. Do you guys see the difference? Like, this is a huge thing that my clients get wrong, that I don't say get wrong, but that they misunderstand, where it's like fear's bad, get rid of it. How do we go not be afraid? It's like, no. How do we make peace with the fear and let it come along and be courageous and do it anyway without judging that part of ourselves that's afraid, because it's normal and human.
So if we were to loop back to this example of an actor who needs to send an important email but is having trouble because they're afraid. But this, I want to, for the people who are watching, if that does not describe you, if you are not an actor, but you're somebody else, but there is something that you're meaning to do, but you're just not doing it because you're afraid of XYZ. Let's go through, if you wouldn't mind, step by step on like literally what we can do on how to do that. So what I'm hearing is, I'm afraid to send this email. So one of the things somebody could do is like sit in front of their computer and open up Gmail and then sit there for a minute and go, cool, I'm feeling fear. Cool, I'm acknowledging that I'm feeling fear. And I'm going to sit here for 60 seconds and feel this fear so that I can, and like you're saying this to yourself, so I can teach my brain that I'm not going to die when I send this email. Yep. Cool. So then you get through that 60 seconds or however long you want to sit there. And then you know, like the actual feeling courses through you and it eventually dies down. And then you can say to yourself, I did not die. I allowed myself, or let's back up. I think actually you could sit there, you could open up your computer, open up to Gmail, and then say to yourself, I am becoming a person who is, how would you put this? It's like a bridge thought, right? Like, I'm becoming a person who is willing to experience being uncomfortable for a minute.
Right.
And then feel uncomfortable.
Well, see, and I think that some of that work, like some of the coaching work and the kind of person that we're becoming, is a little different than what we do in the moment.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But so a couple of things that I do, like in the actual moment, because again, I've done some of the work in advance to resolve my thoughts around fear. So what it actually sounds like in the moment for me is like I'm getting ready to send an email, and this actually happened last night. I used to send an email, and anytime I send emails about asking people for money, I feel a little bit of fear. Like almost every time. It doesn't matter if I'm asking for $1 or $10,000 or $100,000. I feel a little bit of fear. And so like I pull it up, I type the thing, and then I get ready, and I'm fine typing it. And then it's like time to hit send, right? And I feel that like fear. And like for me, honestly, what it sounds like, guys, inside my brain is not complicated. I don't have like, my brain is not full of flowery affirmations. It sounds a lot like, there's fear again. That's super normal. Awesome. And then I hit send. Like it's not really that complicated for me in the moment, because I've already resolved this because I know that happens for me and I can predict it. But typically what I'm doing is, a couple of exercises. One, super fun one is I like to go to worst case scenario.
Okay. So with these exercises that you're talking about, would they be helpful before you sit down to do the task or do the thing that you're supposed to do that you're afraid of?
Probably, yeah. And that's
Okay.
why, it's kind of one of those things where I think it's good to do whenever we're not in the fear, like to have some other separate space or to have some coaching time. So like if we had an email to send, like it's up to you guys. Like I think just knowing, like for me, just knowing like this is normal. My brain thinks that we're in danger. We're not in danger. This is totally fine. And I just hit send. Like that's the whole, like, as long as you don't make it mean anything except for that it's really normal. You can just go ahead and do the work. You can just go ahead and hit the email, things like that. But separately from in the moment, yeah, sitting down to actually work through it and resolving what you think about fear. But usually, like a lot of times I like to go to worst case scenario. It's like, okay, what do I actually think is going to happen here? And I just ask myself some questions. It's like, if I send this email, it's like, okay, worst case scenario that's going to happen is what? They email back and say, you're never going to make it in Hollywood, right? Like what's the worst, like the worst thing that we can think of, or like I get, but most of the time it's going to be something more subtle, like I'm not going to get a reply, right? Or whatever that is. And just recognizing that like, we don't die from not getting replies. An email back, it's genuinely like black and white letters on a screen, on a device outside of your body. Genuinely not harmful. Like genuinely not harmful. What we're scared of is how we might feel. Okay, how we might feel when we get that email, what we might make it mean if they don't reply back. And this is where this kind of ties into deeper work, because it's like, I think, and we started to touch on this earlier, but like bringing it back, I think a lot of times what we're really afraid of is that it means something about us as people. Right? That it means that we're not good enough, that it means that we're never going to make it, that it means that, we're broken, that it means that, we're fundamentally flawed, that we have to earn our worth. I don't know what it is, but a lot of times it'll come back to that thing. And what we're really afraid of is this little thing, like hitting an email. What we're afraid it's going to do is create evidence for this belief about ourselves. And a lot of times if we resolve that, and that does take a little bit of work. It's excellent work to do with a coach, but it is also stuff you guys can coach yourself through to get to that place of realizing, oh, it doesn't actually mean that at all. And I could give it a different meaning. And this actually doesn't have anything to do with my worth as a person, because that doesn't have anything to do with my career. That's all innate. And so, but just, I like to just spend a lot of time. I like to spend time. And if it's something really big and scary, I give myself enough time to coach through it and understand myself. Again, whenever we're afraid of the fear, right? It's like, I have fear and I'm afraid of the fear. We spend a lot of time trying to escape it. When we sit down, it's like, oh, okay, I get it. Like if this happens, I feel an emotion. Okay, that's not harmful, right? Or what I'm actually afraid of is I would beat myself up. Oh, and that's just a choice that I don't have to do. Or I'm afraid it would mean this about me. Okay, right, but I get to decide what I make it mean, and it doesn't have to mean that. And so I just like to go through and play all of those things out and give my brain an answer. Because it's like, if we just let it go, yeah, who knows where it's going to end up. I'm no, I'm like going to send it. And if the worst case scenario happens, I'm going to feel an emotion that I'm going to process. I'm going to give it a meaning that I like and that serves me. And I absolutely am going to have my own back and love myself all the way through this and not beat myself up. And whenever I know that, when I know I have my own back at the end, it's really less scary. And then that fear can still be there and I can do it anyway. But I think that's really, I mean, tell me if that seems true to you, but for those of you guys on here, but I really think that the scariest part is what we are going to make it mean afterwards. But that's all within you guys' control. Like, yeah, it's like we're afraid of ourselves. We're afraid of our own brains. We're afraid of our choices.
Yeah. So one of the coolest things that I learned from you first, when we first started coaching together, was the concept of the fact that we get to choose our thoughts.
It's crazy, right?
Okay. And I know that might sound like a very easy sentence, but it's not, right? Like, for my whole life, I just thought that everything I thought was true.
It's true. Yep.
And how many thoughts do we have a day? Like 60,000 or something ridiculous like that?
Yeah, they say 50 to 60,000. I think I'm definitely on the 60,000 end.
Right. Me too. And so I used to believe that everything I thought about other people, about myself, about situations, that it was all true. Mm-hmm. Not realizing that it was my brain, not like it was my unconscious brain doing stuff and I got to choose what I believed and then what I would think about, like thoughts. I was like, oh, I can take this thing that I thought I believed and then acknowledge it, be okay with it, and then like choose something different that's then going to set my life in a different course. What? You know, right? It was such a mind-blowing thing to learn how to do.
Yes.
And the thing you had me do was what you call thought downloads, mm-hmm. where I would literally just sit down and write out for, 5-10 minutes, like all the things I'm thinking about. And they can be as mundane as I need to go grocery shopping to I feel like I'm sucking at my business, mm-hmm. and then pick one of those and then do this thing called the model, which for those of you watching, most of you guys, you're one of, you follow either one of us. You've heard us talk about this before. If you haven't, I have a video on our IGTV that goes through how, like what the model is. But anyway, and I feel like the same principle about being able to choose your thoughts it's also choosing the emotion you're about to have with whatever that thought or situation is.
Yes. We get to, like people are very confused by their emotions, but when you understand they just come from our thinking, mm-hmm. and that's the thing, most people think that their emotions come from their external circumstances. They don't. The external circumstances just trigger our thinking, which puts us in an emotional state. And that's the thing, like emotions that's why they're not good or bad. They're just a natural product of the sentence that went through our brain. And so people talk about like managing emotions. I actually don't love that language. So there's a lot of language that I don't love. Last time we're like time management. I'm like, we don't need to manage time. Let's manage ourselves. We're like emotional management. Like we don't need to manage, like, okay, we get to choose, what we do when we're in an emotional state. And I do think we should definitely be very much in control of our actions and choose whether or not we're reactive. But the emotions themselves, I never argue with. Like they just are. Mm-hmm. And they're just the map that leads me back to my own thinking to figure out what's happening there, and to understand myself. And they can be a red flag. They can be like an indication to pause. But I'm always going back and looking at those things. And so I think when people first start doing this work, there's sort of like a first phase of understanding things after the fact, right? Usually when people come to me, there's something happening in their actions that they don't understand. They're like, kind of like I know we've talked about, or like the example you used earlier of like, I would like to be a person that gets up and exercises in the morning, mm-hmm. and I'm not. Mm-hmm. I would like to be marketing myself, but I'm not. I'd like to be doing this, but I'm not, or like, I would like to stop doing this thing. I'd like to stop overeating, but I'm still doing it. Mm-hmm. And people come to me, or there's some sort of result. And so that's the part they can see. They can see the results they're creating for themselves. They can see their actions. And so a lot of times what we do initially is go back and understand it. And that's always where I start. We need to understand, we need to make peace. It always makes sense. It's always coming back to our thinking. And where our thinking comes from also makes sense. We spend a lot of time doing that so we can be in a state of self-compassion. And so that's kind of step one, and people do need to start there. But then, yes, kind of like another phase of this of emotional ownership is not just taking responsibility for the emotions that we're feeling as the product of our thinking, but learning that we can generate helpful emotions on purpose by choosing our thoughts on purpose.
And by the way, those helpful emotions can be fear, can be, like it's that going back to that thing we talked about earlier where emotions aren't necessarily good or bad. Mm-hmm. They're just tools.
Yeah. And it's just and they're very unique. And that's the thing, like which ones we pick is it's like what kind of emotion, actually creates a scenario where I naturally take the action that I want to take or don't take the action that I want to take. And it's very unique. And that's mm-hmm. That's whenever I talk about it, I don't talk about like, let's switch to a positive emotion, because that's not always what's helpful. Like sometimes the ones we're choosing are kind of those ones where it's like, I think this is a good one, but it actually doesn't feel great. Like tenacity doesn't always feel great, but sometimes it's very, very helpful. Like I said, empathy doesn't always feel great, but it's very, it can be helpful depending on the scenario. And so we do get to go back and we get to choose them, but the point isn't always to choose a positive one. The point is to choose a helpful one that serves us. And that's what we always talk about, the difference between what's happening kind of on autopilot, unintentionally, without thinking, like where does your brain go to naturally. And a lot of that, guys, it's such old programming that it's going to take years for you to undo all that. So you just need to accept that first wave is going to come up and it's all just fine. But after that, you get to decide what you do. And that's where, like, if we're in fear, that's when we can on purpose generate courage, right? And we can do that intentionally, and we can move over to this different space. But yeah, no, it's so true. And I think that realization of, oh, I can generate this on purpose and intentionally, and I can spend time thinking the kinds of thoughts that create genuine emotions. That was also revelatory for me. I was like, wait a minute. Because I think a lot of people feel like they're victims of their emotions, right? Or like it's completely outside of their control. And some of them are, like, there is, just to be honest, I always tell people, like, our emotions come from our thinking. There is like your basal ganglia, like really lower part of your brain where, like, and it does create emotion without language. So like, I want to be really accurate here. So like if you're on a roller coaster and then you like drop suddenly, your body will release a bunch of like fear stuff without you having any sort of conscious thought. That's why people do it, because it's like they get to experience that rush, and there's not language. We just have the thought afterwards. But that's not usually what's happening. Like that's usually we're having a thought, there's a sentence that goes through our brain and it creates an emotion, and taking really full ownership of recognizing we can generate helpful emotions on purpose is life-changing. And it's also that ownership. So I think sometimes we're waiting for other people to do it for us. Like we want to feel like, as actors, we want to feel qualified. We want to feel, like we're skilled, but we're waiting for somebody to tell us that. We're waiting for somebody to tell us it's our time. We're waiting for somebody to tell us.
You're ready.
You're ready. That's the thing. Yeah.
We're telling you right now.
we're telling you, but then like if you have to wait for an Instagram live or a coach or somebody to let you know you can go do it, it's going to be so sporadic. Like this is that place where like every day we have to sit down and tell ourselves the kind of the thoughts that we need to hear to create the emotional space that lets us go get stuff done. And sometimes but it's not always going to be rainbow. Sometimes I can feel fear and do it anyway. It's okay that it's hard.
Yeah. So we do have one really excellent question.
Ooh, good.
What's the positive impact that fear could have on us, and can we see it as a gift? Well, yes, we can. But I'll let you answer this, and then I feel like I have a pretty good example that I could use. That
I want to hear. Can I hear yours first?
Sure.
I'm curious.
Well, I was thinking about what kind of example I could think of where a quote negative emotion could actually have a positive effect. And the example I had wasn't so much about fear; it was actually about anger, right? So, when is it helpful to be really angry, and how could that be positive? It could be positive when you're tired of school shootings and you want to finally do something about it, and you're super angry that nobody's doing anything about it, so you do something about it. Or that, something kind of a big injustice has happened, like the guy who got murdered jogging, right? Or 2 months ago or whatever. And people got so outraged that they called for justice, and then justice was served. And they used their anger in a positive way, right? Like, they didn't just send all this stuff out because they were feeling a lot of love. They were feeling a lot of anger. Would you agree with that or no? Because your face tells me that you don't agree with that.
I can see what you're saying. And so I'm not going to say I totally disagree. Anger is an interesting one for me. And this was interesting.
I have trouble because I don't like to get angry. Right. Yeah. I don't like how that makes me feel. So I tend to, like try not to be angry about stuff.
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, this is maybe a little off topic. So you guys have to tell me, those of you who are actors, if this resonates with you guys.
And by the way, we only have about 8 minutes left. So just
okay.
FYI. Yeah.
That anger, I'm very, very cautious about anger. And I don't usually choose it on purpose for myself. Mm-hmm. And this is one of those places where it can be individual. And so I don't want to create like, rules for anybody, but I would say be very self-aware, because what I find is that a lot of times anger is what we choose because we're not willing to feel something like fear.
Okay.
Because a lot of times it's like, and I think sometimes people do this in there. I see this with actors, I think, a bit, like where it's like we're actually feeling insecure, or we're feeling small, or we're feeling doubt, or we're feeling fear, we're feeling anxiety. And those are so uncomfortable. I think for a lot of people, it can feel a little victim-y if we don't understand it. Almost, or it's like, yeah, like that we are a victim to our emotions. And sometimes people choose anger because it feels more powerful. And like I'll see actors and like all of their language is about all the stuff they're mad about in the industry, all the stuff that they don't like. But it's fascinating because I talk to a lot of different people and they've all got different thoughts on it. And one person's I'll see two people in different, like they almost have like opposite situations, but they're both angry about it. And because sometimes I think it's easier. I think sometimes anger is just easier to feel than being afraid because we don't understand the fear itself. And so I'm just always careful. I'm just careful for me. I'm careful because I know that sometimes anger is what I go to as a way to buffer and not feel those other emotions that are so uncomfortable that I'm not really willing to fear. Anger is just easier. Now, and you guys just have to look at this for yourself. And this is where, like, if we had the model looking up, you just need to be honest. Because, like, if you're feeling anger and you look at what you actually do, I would be very, very, very curious. Because I think that most of us, when we're angry, we don't do a lot except for put a lot of hate out into the world, in truth. And I think that if we see something and there's like anger as part of it, I think that's totally fine. It's totally normal. But I think when we're actually taking action and like doing, like speaking up, having a voice, I think that's actually probably generated by a different emotion than anger. Okay. Like it might actually be love and we don't realize it, or it might be, I mean, something as simple as like motivation, like where we're actually thinking, or capable, like the thought of my voice can make a difference. If I speak up, if enough of us speak up, we can be heard. That's actually an emotion of feeling capable. I can make a difference, makes us feel capable, and then we go speak up. So it's interesting though, like anger is probably in there, but you'll just have to look for yourself if that's actually the emotion that's generating you to take that action, or if it's something else.
Well, then this is bringing up a really good point, that in the same way that when I started working on my thought work, and the step one was like identifying the thoughts, because you have so many that you don't realize you're having like 18 when you really think you're only having one. There's like 18, right?
Yes.
And like learning how to recognize the thoughts that are going in your head. I feel like the same is true for emotions, right? Learning how to recognize what you're actually feeling and seeing if there's anything underneath that, and just being like, start being aware of how you're feeling about stuff. And I know that this talk today is really mostly based around fear. But that fear might be masking other things. And if you don't start paying attention to what it is you're thinking and feeling, it's always going to be a mystery. And I don't think it needs to be, right? Like we want to be able to acknowledge these things and use them in the right way.
Yes.
Go ahead. I was
gonna say, and like just back to the question of like, can fear be helpful or useful? Again, I'm thankful for fear because again, like I was having this conversation in the car with my kids the other day. I don't know how we started talking about. I think one of my kids asked me if I'd ever like had like claustrophobia. I don't know where that is. Nadia, of course, she asked those. She's the kid that we like go to see like the bioluminescence at the ocean, and she wants to talk about that. She's a very active brain, but we were talking about helpful fears, right? And I'm like, I think some of those things that a lot of us are afraid of, they actually are useful. And I do think at this point, whenever I look at fear, I'm like, I actually thank my brain for the fear a lot, but you can be thankful for it without reacting to it. And so I think it usually does, because typically it's, again, fear is usually our brain letting us know there's something that could be coming that could be dangerous. And it could be physically dangerous. It could be emotionally dangerous. But even that, even if my brain is like, oh, we could be embarrassed, I'm like, thank you. Like, thank you for letting me know that we could be embarrassed, because then what I can do is sit down and make peace with the fact that I might be embarrassed. I can sort it out within myself and make a decision that I'm willing to feel it. I can go to worst case scenario and imagine myself feeling it and let myself know I'm going to be fine. And like, honestly, even that, like, even though we know that that's like maybe the least useful part of fear, and it's not one that we want to necessarily live our lives around, I'm actually thankful that it's there, because that fear, it helps us be prepared. Like, in a very practical sense, it's like it keeps us from putting ourselves in very tight spaces where we might die, or getting too close to the edge of a cliff, or getting too close to traffic. But also it helps us prepare to say, like, if we try this venture, we could fall flat on our face. And I'm like, yes, we could. And are we willing to do that? And is it worth it? And usually my answer is just yes, because I know that I'm comfortable with those emotions. But I'm always thankful for it, because that fear is that advanced warning system, and it gives me time to prepare either physically or emotionally for whatever's coming. So I always thank the fear. I always think it. I think it's a very, very useful emotion, as long as I understand it and I work with it instead of judging it or giving it a really negative meaning.
Cool.
So I hope that kind of answers the question.
Yeah. So we have a minute 40 remaining. So just to recap, people are afraid to feel, like, the fear is really based around feeling other emotions that they're afraid to feel. And so that's what's preventing them from doing stuff. So start to cultivate this idea that you are willing to become a person that is willing to be uncomfortable for a minute.
Yes.
And then to do it anyway. Right? Yeah. Cool. Yeah. If you're just joining us, this talk has been amazing. It's going to be on the live replay for the next 24 hours. I would highly recommend listening to the first 15, 20 minutes of it, because she talks about all sort of like emotions and base and stuff. But we have a minute remaining. How can people get to, if they want to connect with you or work with you, how can they do that?
Yeah, you guys can go. I mean, I'm on Instagram, Coach Lorrie Gray. Send me a message. Even if you don't want to work with me, send me a message. I just like meeting people. So everybody just send me messages. I like talking to everybody. I do have a website. It's just my name, lorriegray.com. You can also just email me, hello@lorriegray.com, any of the ways, depending on how long your message is. But I genuinely do just love hearing from people and meeting people. So regardless of where that is. And if you guys have other questions that weren't answered in this, or something that's personal, just send me a message and I'll reply.
Yeah. And she's, she's coming on in a couple of weeks to do confidence versus self-confidence. That's going to be so good. Ooh, guys, it's going to be so good. Anyway,
I can't wait.
I hope you guys enjoyed this. I'm just going to let the time run out. We have 13 seconds remaining. Thank you, Lorrie, for coming on with us.
It's always so fun. I feel like we could talk about this topic for days.
Yeah. Agreed.